Back by popular demand, round 2 in 2016. For comparison purposes, here is the initial setup of the board. Halfway through turn 1, pretty standard opening moves for Japan, Russia, and Germany, more or less. Japan has once again done the J1 declaration of war. See them spread out thusly in Asia and here in the Pacific. Again, taking Philippines pretty quickly. Unfortunately, this time got diced a bit with this battleship that put up a good fight. Took out both the cruiser and one of my bombers, which was unfortunate. On the German side, I have refined the Nordic naval strategy a little bit here by buying 4 transports instead of 2 transports and a carrier, as is the normal opening move, and positioned my land units accordingly. Yugoslavia didn't go very well. I decided, hey, I don't want to send my planes in there because I don't want to accidentally win Yugoslavia. This is only the little Yugoslavian do-si-do to get the infantry on the other side and soften it up a bit for the Italian purposes. Unfortunately, I rolled really poorly, lost 3 guys, only took out 1 of those, so left a little bit more for Italy to do. But because of the more heavy northern positioning of the German units this time around, Russia has reacted accordingly. You see its land units and mostly infantry purchases there positioned up north and not so much down below as usual. And this time around, Russia is sending a little bit more armor towards China in anticipation of what has historically been a quick expansion of Japan. In the Atlantic, the little U-boat that could once again performed well, taking out this fleet for once. That usually doesn't happen. The British fleet did pretty well in knocking back the Luftwaffe, taking out 1 plane, the rest of them positioned here. And now we're positioned to see what the Allies do on the rest of turn 1. Well, at the end of turn 1, we can't say that this one was by the book and has not been boring, that's for sure. The U.S. has decided to pull all its naval units back here to San Francisco and to spend its whole build out here, building, of all things, a ton of transports and land units. So, gee, where could those guys be going? Hard to say. But it's certainly a big difference from prior strategies. On the rest of the Pacific front, Chris has followed through on his threat to be aggressive with India. You see here both Sumatra and Java being taken up by UK and Anzac. But you'll also see a big old UK fleet here in the Indian Ocean. That's because they all retreated from the Mediterranean and formed up down here to put some real early game naval aggression in the Indian Ocean. One of those things that you don't see very often, certainly unconventional, but we are attempting to deflect the J1 attack and see what can be done to repel that. So Italy, finding itself with something it's really never encountered before, 3 transports to use on its very first turn. It got a little aggressive. I took some chances and spread myself out a little thin, and unfortunately got diced a bit along the way. So we went into Greece and took that, but had to lose a plane in the process in order to keep it with land units. We barely took southern France because those guys were just dicing the crap out of me. Took the French naval units. Took most of North Africa, with one gaping exception here, of course, which would be Morocco. So I sent an infantry and a artillery in there. In retrospect, wish I had a tank, but Had to send him into southern France. Wish I had the battleship shot, but no guarantee of that hitting. That was 2 2s versus 1 2. Had that hit, I would have gotten my North African bonus, but more importantly, there would have been no landing spot for this French plane, which then came down and took out the 2 unaccompanied transports. Calculated that out ahead of time, knew that as long as I won that battle, none of the planes from London could get there to take out those transports, so I risked it, threw all my naval units here into southern France to take out those 2 French naval units while sending overwhelming force there. That was a miscalculation. Should have sent more force over here, at least sent something, held something back to protect these transports. Even if they didn't help Morocco, they would have at least made UK or France think twice about sending that plane down. But as it was, lost 2 land units and 2 transports, so that's a big IPC swing. Will it be in the game? No, not individually, but it sure does slow me down and kind of thwart what could have been a really powerful opening move for Italy. I mean, hey, I'm not complaining. Italy's got a lot of land there, but it still kind of stings a bit. You'll see a great emptiness here in the Atlantic. Interesting how that will pan out on turn 2. But first, a word from Old Cricket.
All right. Old Cricket from the abandoned monitoring station in Dallas, Texas. If you're watching this video and you're thinking to yourself, that is the dumbest crap I've ever seen in my entire life, he just pulled out of the med for no good reason, you might be right. I actually read on the Axis and Allies forum page that is an objectively bad move and should never ever be done. I did it on game 1, and I think I've commented on 7 other games that was the dumbest thing I've ever done. And so it occurred to me when I read that on the forums that I was going to do exactly that. And the reason is this. There's nothing else in theater that can stop the mass conflagration that's coming from Japan. So, in my estimation, if this doesn't work, I am out of ideas of how to slow that down, because I am throwing every single boat humanly possible at that massive fleet to try to slow that down, recognizing 100% that Italy is going to get very, very large, and I will have to clean that mess up at some later point in the game. That being said, the Toronto raid, as evidenced in the last several games, is not always a success. Sometimes you get diced, and it sucks. The raid down there in Malta or C-Zone 96, not always a success. Sometimes you get diced, and suddenly your strategy in the med gets blown apart anyways. And I calculated the odds in Tobruk, also not great. So it just struck me that instead of throwing away that entire navy on what might be a sketchy, requiring good dice rolls on turn 1, I'd preserve it and try to slow Japan down. And that's the thought. Anyways, I usually save these thoughts for the end of the game, but since I'm sure more than one person's watching this video thinking I'm on crack, I thought I would do a little inter-game interjection to let you know that I might be, but I just want to see what happens and if this works in slowing down the J1 attack. We'll be back.
Here in the middle of turn 2, getting ready to see what the U.S. is going to bring. Japan has just completed its turn. You'll see that we've reinforced the homeland a bit with some subs. Brought a battleship back up. We have planes kind of in striking distance of the homeland, and instead of building the factory down below, we've built that factory in Manchuria. Why? Well, we've got the U.S. fleet in San Francisco with a bunch of transports, as you've seen. We have these guys poised to do something deadly with the backup of all this armor and Russia's entire air force, which is headed over this way, to be supplemented by some additional armor here down south, potentially. So what did Japan do this turn? It made a couple conservative moves, actually just really one move into China, not even making a play for the Burma Road, rather building up its land forces inch by inch, building some infantry there, landing planes in a few different places, doing a bomb on the factory in India and making a play for the islands, although since both Anzac and UK had occupied these islands, required the commitment of enough forces to where we weren't able to take celebs and thus not complete the Money Island Quattro. Anzac poised to be bothersome over here. On the Atlantic board so far this turn, Germany making a push up into the Baltic states, as I think everybody anticipated. Sacrificing a transport in order to get an AA gun over there because I was stupid and didn't place an AA gun, didn't move one up the first turn. Turned out that Russia didn't send its air force that way anyway, but you never can be too careful. Bombed the factory, and Russia didn't even bother to fix it, rather pulling back all its infantry all the way back to Bryansk, leaving only modest defenders on this front, almost inviting Germany to spill further in and kind of just holding the line here while devoting most of Russia's attention to Japan. Germany has completed taking its European territories and built several infantry, artillery, as well as finishing out its navy, by the way, because that's a carrier in there and a destroyer and a submarine, because we've got these pesky Russian subs, which of course we knew we were going to have to deal with, and we can't really advance all of the transports to Leningrad on turn 2 without, well, first taking care of the destroyer as we did, and then of course being destroyed in turn by these subs, so got to inch forward carefully there. Allies poised to do all sorts of interesting things here on turn 2. All done with turn 2, and this is what the US chose to do. Built a naval base here in Alaska, which is currently unoccupied because the entire US fleet, transports and all, dumped a whole lot of stuff here in the Soviet Far East. Those are AA guns, they're 7 infantry, we got mechs, we got tanks, we got planes, we got the whole shebang right there. We got 2 turns worth of American buys sitting in the Soviet Far East. Of course, Japan bought those subs and beefed up its naval presence, but still not quite in favor here for the Japanese. So the odds are about 30%, I think, on Japan's attack if they were to go for that navy right now. A little dicey, but we'll see how Japan chooses to react to the Americans' presence. The Anzac have predictably come up here, gotten their bonus through the Dutch New Guinea acquisition. Again, they still own Malaya for some reason. The UK has piled all of its navy, Mediterranean and Calcutties alike, to occupy the Indian Sea Zone here. That's quite a bit of ships, and had a bit of a poor role here, sending what it had in an air force against what was here in the Sea Zone 41. Specifically, a aircraft carrier was taken out. Planes landed on the island, but the defensive rules were good enough that the Indians chose to retreat and build that carrier there to land those planes on. And
You didn't build it, it came from the bed.
oh, okay, so the carrier was already there. But anyway, they landed, they retreated from the battle, and they lived to fight another day. In Africa, Italy has expanded to its natural size, its full potential here in the Mediterranean, getting the ring around the Med, which the Allies shall not wash out anytime soon. Finally coming with force this time into Morocco, taking that. Fortunately, fighting off not 1 but 2 invasions into Gibraltar. I think the Allies thought they'd stymie us and slow Italy's advance down a little bit by occupying Gibraltar. First sent the Brazilians in, and then the Canadians managed to kill both infantry and the German attack bomber that had been there to reinforce, but not occupied, so that still belongs to the Italians. Italians also punching out and taking Egypt. Tried to come up from Kenya into Sudan. That didn't work out so well, so we retreated. All in all, though, Italy's doing not bad. Finally took Yugoslavia, not so much because it needed it, but because it's in the way. And these tanks weren't doing anything otherwise, thanks to my loss of transports in the previous turn. So we put those to good use. Got some more IPCs there. So when Italy collects 36, it's feeling pretty good on turn 2. UK has purchased a bomber and some folks down in South Africa. If you caught those, there's a plane and 2-3 mechs waiting to come up. So they're certainly not counting Africa out, but they're a bit behind the 8 ball as we start turn 3. Halfway through turn 3, Japan has responded to the American threat by building some more subs, bringing up a battleship, transport, building a destroyer, bringing some stuff up, bringing a whole bunch of planes over from Asia, building tanks in Manchuria, just waiting for the coming onslaught. We'll see that Russia kind of fully committed. Those tanks and planes were kind of halfway, seeing where that was going to go, and they've now fully committed over here to the Siberian Peninsula. Japan pushing forward gently a little bit into China, taking a few territories, keeping busy. Down here, though, we made a couple big pushes. Some went better than others. We took every piece of available Navy and aircraft from Southeast Asia to take out this Indian Navy here. So we've taken out all the warships. That transport survived only because that plane survived off the carrier. The odds were actually in my favor on that one. I think 70% or something on the calculator. But the rolls didn't go so well. I took out the Navy, quite a few ships that were there, of course. So now there's really no British Navy to speak of, not in the Indian, not in the Med, a couple ships here and there. At least that momentum in India, that threat to Japan's expansion is over, but Japan's left with not much ability to do expanding, so at a little bit of a stalemate here. We'll see how he takes advantage of that. We've got some perhaps underprotected islands and a transport or two unavoidably, but we've got the money islands, so we got the money for that this time around. And because these transports here, which took all the guys that were available and the planes that were available in Indochina that couldn't get to the Indian Ocean, went to Malaya instead, took that, but because the transports ended up unprotected from what's left here, we had to pull the battleship down from the Philippines instead of throwing it up top. Over on this side of the board, Germany made a big push into Leningrad, taking that with some measure of authority. Have quite a few guys transported in there. Of course, Russia hasn't contested it, has pulled back instead to Moscow, where the bulk of its forces are. That green ship, that's a 20. So yeah, there's some ungodly number of guys, and then we've got artillery in there to boot, so they're not a mere defensive wall, but they've got some oomph to them. But Germany's naval Nordic strategy is fully operational now, and we'll see how the Allies respond on the rest of turn 3. We've reached the end of turn 3. You see that the U.S. pulled back its units all the way here to this cove to insulate them from the potential Japanese attack with all these subs that were built up. You'll also see that the U.S. made their build in the Pacific with a carrier and associated naval units and infantry as well. Apparently that was intended for the Atlantic. Chris can talk about that, but something happened on Japan's turn that caused them to build it in the Pacific instead. Maybe the fact that we have a transport here now in Japan, which raises interesting issues. So The Americans, though, sent a strap bomber to bomb Manchuria. That didn't go so well, got shot down. Nevertheless, the Americans are inching into position here, having sent the first half into a more. Certainly to be joined by Russians, no doubt. The Anzac folks making a nuisance of themselves as they are wont to do, and taking out a few unguarded Japanese ships. Unfortunately, had to go that way. UK down here taking Sumatra, which of course is also annoying, and beefing up the Chinese here as well in Yunnan. So that's an area where Japan's hurting a little bit. Its forward momentum kind of stalled a bit with some aggressive Chinese and aggressive Indians. Sticking to the land now that the navals have been traded. Italy, rather, just continuing to spread out unhindered, swinging its navy back this way this time in order to assist with expanding into the Middle East. We see we've eradicated these guys in Sudan, finally consolidated our hold down there. Left a couple subs for anybody who wishes to trespass across Gibraltar. And still nothing going on in the Atlantic. In fact, the UK forces even pulling back to Central America, perhaps to join the Pacific conflagration on turn 4. Halfway through turn 4, we're in a somber mood because Japan did not have a good turn. You see that they've thrown everything they possibly can up here in Manchuria to kind of plug the hole from what's coming. Built some planes, some tanks, and a few mechs here in the coast, but their invasion into Szechuan did not go so well. Was hoping to take advantage of the opportunity to kill that plane. Didn't work out. At least I retreated my planes before they died, but now there's a whole lot of exposure here. Perhaps even worse, the invasion of Sumatra. So I let the transport live just so I could get my amphibious assaults, and those didn't go so well. We traded guys. Was not able to occupy the island. So that's 9 IPCs that have fallen short this turn. One glimmer, I did get Hawaii, which is, I think the vulnerability there may have been why U.S. built its build in the Pacific last turn, and couldn't pass up grabbing that city. So at least for the time being, as an extra 5 IPCs, kind of cushion the blow a little bit. Germany doing what Germany does, pushing forward on the line here. Russia falling back, not even trying to contest the Eastern Front, but just turtling in Moscow and sitting on, that's 40 something, 47 dudes. So they're going to be there a while. Certainly long past the rest of turn 4. At the end of turn 4, we are remarkably even, perhaps, in the strategic distribution on the board. So U.S. brought its entire fleet down here to Hawaii, took that back, and now has consolidated its naval power. Of course, no backup yet coming from the mainland because that build was done in the Atlantic this turn. The U.S. was sorely tempted to try a full-on invasion of the Japanese homeland, since I had neglected to throw up a naval blocker there, as my first intention had been. But all in all, the kamikazes kind of tilted the odds and nevertheless saved me from that attempt, and probably would have been victorious, but it's never a good feeling to have your homeland in jeopardy. Up here we've got the land units poised on the borders here for whoever wants to pull the trigger first or just sit there with a huge wall. Meanwhile, the Chinese attempted an invasion here in Kwang Sea, and that was one thing that went well for the Japanese. They repulsed those pretty good, and they retreated, but there's still no advantage for the Japanese there right now. The Indians have been remarkably effective, taking back both Malaya and, as we saw before, Sumatra. Now the Anzakians are getting in on the action, taking Java, consolidating a navy up here, and collecting more than 20 IPCs this turn with all their bonuses now back in effect. So you know where that's going to go next turn. Over here, the Italians sorely tempted to bring their sizable navy down in the Mediterranean. Ultimately, though, choosing the more conservative route, only pushing forward into Iraq and building in Egypt, and rather swinging their navy over here, bolstering Gibraltar to answer what has been a fairly quick and large buildup in the Atlantic. For sure, this buildup is meant to accomplish exactly that: draw Italy and Germany's attention back to the Atlantic, take a little bit of pressure off the middle of the board here for a turn, kind of slow down the momentum on the other side. And the sad thing is it's effective, because that's exactly what we have to do. Hopefully, though, Germany can maintain this momentum, in Italy as well, digging in towards Russia on turn 5. Halfway through turn 5, Japan has done what it can do, this time remembering to throw a blocker in the sea zone to keep the Hawaiian fleet off its back, and in the meantime sending the rest of its home fleet down to the Philippines. Why? Well, because it offered the best chance of offering this battle fleet group here, battleship group, safe passage back to somewhere relatively safe. It had been so far out of position down here on that Sumatra gambit that didn't pay off that it was more or less screwed wherever it went. But this ends up, I think, being at least the best odds, best combination of naval positions. Traded a cruiser for this pesky transport here, just because that's too dangerous. It's a ugly swap of IPCs, but we just can't have those transports floating around at least any more than necessary. Of course, there's another one here waiting in Sydney, and some naval losses and island losses here are going to be unavoidable, but we got to kind of circle the wagons as best as possible. Invested in a factory here, not because I'm dying to build infrastructure in Asia right now, but because I need it if I'm going to have any chance of hanging out. Continuing to beef up over here on the DMZ, and just kind of positioning myself as best as possible in Asia. In the European front, not a lot of movement. Germany continues to spill forth, this time beginning to encircle Moscow on the north and the south down there in Caucasus. Didn't grab Volgograd yet because it wasn't secure from a Russian counterattack. And at the same time now repositioning the Baltic fleet to coordinate with the Italians to fend off these Atlantic fleets. So we'll see where this standoff goes in the rest of turn 5. And as we reach the end of turn 5, Japan grows ever more somber. You'll see, hey, where'd all that American fleet go? Where'd it all go? Where'd it all go? Oh, there it is. It's all right there, the Carolines. Quite a bit of boats, supplemented now by quite a bit of Anzac boats. So Anzac had its opportunity to whittle down the Philippine fleet here, or take out this cruiser here, and take an island or two, but it's played it conservatively, helping to beef up this now indestructible fleet here in the Caroline Islands, to be supplemented by, yep, that's an Anzac carrier on its way to rendezvous with those planes. UK has continued to push forward into Southeast Asia. We're breaking up the Indian markers there, which we haven't used in quite a while. The Indian and Chinese armies have joined up now to form another huge stack down here. So Japan really has its work cut out for it on a number of fronts, and that's a little scary. Ain't gonna lie. I'm not sure how long Japan can hold out on its own. So what it's hoping for is some help from some of the other Axis powers to push back the Allies. Italy doing its part. You see those Italian markers spreading through the Middle East. Italy now collecting every single national objective bonus that's available to it. Collecting, I think, 49 this turn. That's awesome for Italy, but remains to be seen what it'll be able to do with it. On the UK's turn, we have built up a navy, and US supplemented that as well. So we've got a couple multinational stacks on both sides of the board, ready to pounce on Germany and Japan in turn 6. So halfway through turn 6, Japan is just holding on for dear life, throwing up a couple blockers to protect the homeland. Dropping that cruiser, which has been tagging along there in Philippines, is another blocker, and collecting the rest of the Navy here in the Formosa Sea Zone and adding a carrier to boot in its builds. So we're starting to cobble together, what appears to be a somewhat respectable Navy. At least it would be, but for in comparison to this Navy, so it's going to be an interesting conflagration here if Chris decides to bring it. On the European side of the board, well, we see the European side of the board has just now started to spill over the crack into the Pacific line. The Nazis just going buck wild, sending tanks now even into China and having completely enveloped Russia, stacking up quite a few units of their own there in Belarus and getting ready to bring them to Moscow. Of course, Moscow, with so many infantry that it's sitting on, has chosen this turn to purchase a few tanks, adding to its offensive capabilities. Shot down a bomber that was attempting to strat bomb it for Germany. Of course, Italy's got its own couple bombers there that have been contributing to that effort. On the Atlantic side of the board, it seems clear that the Allies are considering a major push navally to root out the Germans, and we'll see how that works out in turn 6. We've reached the end of turn 6, and there's no action here in the Pacific because it's all over here. So the Americans ended up deciding to go south with what they've aptly deemed the Japanese castration strategy. Chopping off all the low-hanging fruit, if you would, down here with of Japanese territories that are now under-defended and, in fact, completely undefended. So the Americans have concentrated here in Celebes, taken that, while Anzac takes Java. The UK with Sumatra coming down in there with their one transport, and just like that, the Money Islands are gone with no prospect of taking them back. Anzac's pesky little boats have also spread out here through Hainan, apparently afraid of me coming down with my navy and trying to reassert myself because, I want to bring that on me for some reason. But just to make sure, they're making sure that the Japanese aren't coming south anymore, which indicates to me that the Allies are going to set themselves up here to build up their IPCs, more or less content to let the Japanese Navy live for a turn or two, while meanwhile the Americans have built their factory here because in retrospect perhaps Japan should have taken out that lone American in Korea, but instead kept with its turtle mentality in Manchuria, and now is paying for that on another level as well, because there are a whole crap ton of Americans there safeguarding that factory with Russians up above. Japan slowly being edged out everywhere in Asia. Here they retreated to Hong Kong this turn, and Chinese and Indians have followed them. So one more step till they get pushed out to the sea. Meanwhile, the Chinese have built up their rear guard a little bit. The Italians pushing forward what armor they have to the Indian border, trying to put some pressure on India, but you'll notice have not built anything in their Middle East factories, plural, this turn, because they had to refocus their builds all over here in the Mediterranean. Because, oh, hey, look at that. Yep, they both Atlantic fleets made the push into Gibraltar. I suppose as one may have expected, but you know, when you see it happen in real life, it's a lot uglier. So rolls didn't go especially well for Italy either. So we end up there with not only a sizable remainder of American invaders, but UK reinforcements to boot. That may look like the Spanish beachhead strategy, but only because there's so many people there they can't possibly fit into Gibraltar. So spilling over a little bit into the Spanish territory. And with, of course, a convenient little British blocker there, so that what there is of a German Navy can't come down and do a joint assault on this mess down here with the Italians. So Italy left a blocker, pulled back, built up a ton of subs and some land units waiting to strike back at whatever comes at them in turn 7. We've just finished Japan's turn on turn 7. It has managed to retreat everything to its home waters. Amazingly, that battleship that was so far out of position in Java found a way to make it home. Ran the odds, found out couldn't win in Korea, so we just built up some. Ended up fleeing Kwangtung with everything that could make it out alive, and left the rest to defend Kwangtung in a blaze of glory. Now, you're going to see on the Europe map that I'm poised to take Moscow, and frankly, we both think that Germany is going to win the game with victory cities on turn 8. So I kind of hurriedly did Japan's turn, and yes, that's my fault for not seeing these moves, but just want to point it out for posterity's sake that this fleet that was in Sea Zone 20 and possessed 11 subs to its name was blocked from reaching this American Navy, where it could have eliminated them, had a 100% chance of victory. Blocked by this destroyer here from getting down there, and of course this piece of Anzac Navy here as well. So what I did was retreat and build up my forces back home. The move that I didn't see until too late is that those 11 subs could have split up and, well, of course hit that one, but also hit these two, and not only that, but pass right through them because there's no destroyer there. And because Sea Zone 20 has a naval base in it in Kwangtung, could have passed through Borneo, wiped out this transport here, but not only that, go to Philippines, Sea Zone 45, and Sea Zone 55, where it then could have wiped out this Anzac carrier. So that would have left just the American Navy standing alone and out of position in Celebes to do anything much on its next turn. With the Japanese Navy really at parity with it at that point. So that hurts my heart that I missed that, but for the fact that hopefully it's not going to matter. Now, the reason why we say that it's probably not going to matter is because right over here we got Germany encircling Moscow with, you know, just about everything it could. There's a whole lot of greens there. Let's just say I've run the odds and they're looking pretty good for Germany. Built everything I could. So with 89 IPCs to spend last turn and the Allied Atlantic fleet, which is gargantuan fleet here, prepared to wreak havoc anywhere in Europe that it chooses to, you might have thought, and certainly my initial inclination was to buy just a whole crap ton of dudes and beef up the land units here in Europe, perhaps even gear up for a Sea Lion move, either of which I probably could have done with 89 IPCs and with varying levels of success, but at least I'd be staving off the American and UK invasion and gearing up for the long run. Trouble is, you know, Japan doesn't have a long run. Japan is withering on the vine here very quickly, and keep Germany's momentum moving forward, it's not going to win the game. So, have you ever seen the movie Deep Impact, where after the asteroid hits the ocean and the tide recedes, and then all of a sudden it explodes back outwards? Well, that was my intention here. Threw everything towards Moscow, building every unit I could that could reach Moscow next turn, with the idea that it would concentrate there in Moscow, and then after taking it, explode back out on all fronts and in all directions. Turns out, which Chris pointed out, and I actually hadn't been thinking of, but turns out that Moscow is the last victory city that I need to win under the rules in the European map. So, presuming we take that, it should be looking okay. Assuming that the Allies don't figure out a way to take a victory city here and hold it on the next turn, then the Germans should be doing okay. So as long as the rest of turn 7 works out for it. We've reached the end of turn 7, and as predicted, it's been a pretty devastating one for the Axis from just the perspective of this one turn. The Americans and Anzac both have chosen to completely retreat from the Northern and Mid-Pacific, bringing both their navies all the way down. So we see a new navy here being built by the Anzac, while the rest of the Anzac Ghost Fleet, which really shouldn't exist because I should have sunk them, combining with the U.S. here in Malaya. So those are all spilling out of that sea zone there where the naval base is located. You might even notice another naval base here in West India. Why? Well, because India built it this turn to complete its strategy of bringing the Southern Navy over to Africa that much quicker. India is earning more IPCs right now than the European UK, more than Japan, and tied with Italy at this point, and that won't last long because Italy's on its way down too. So it's doing remarkably well under this strategy. While the Italians are in full retreat, never really thinking they were going to make it into India, but certainly realizing now that they need to pull back. Perhaps because there is this whole mess in the Mediterranean. So as we expected, they've made a full push here, taking out, smartly I might add, and sending the air units only to take out the surface ships, leaving these 10 subs to fend for themselves underwater. They struck back by taking out a carrier here, but that's all they could do, leaving the rest of this monstrosity here floating in the sea zone, and all these units in Gibraltar, where the Allies have even built an air base to support their launch into Italy proper next turn. That is, of course, assuming that there is a next turn, because as we said, Germany is poised to take Moscow. Now, you never can tell, can't take anything for granted. The dice calculator sure shows those odds in Germany's favor, but stranger things have happened. We'll see what pans out on turn 8. This is a quick interlude at the very, very beginning of turn 8, just so you can see what a ginormous battle board looks like, with about 60 pieces on either side. Those are green chips, represent 20s, so now there's quite a bit more than 60 pieces. All those are in Moscow, which is why the board is curiously empty right now everywhere around. Be fun to see how this one turns out. Halfway through turn 8, and Japan has just completed its turn, which was kind of anticlimactic because it didn't do much. Still building up land units here in Manchuria, built a few down here. So far, at least this turn, Shanghai is safe from the Chinese hordes. But you'll see we cleared out the naval units. We could have gone up to Alaska, made a nuisance of ourselves up there, and thought about it long and hard, but instead brought the whole Navy down here to the Philippines, retook those, and I think comfortable enough holding on to that for now. At least give the Ghost Fleet and the Americans something to think about here. Clearly, this whole Navy is poised to just launch into the Indian Ocean, so whether that was his plan or not, I don't know. At least we've given him pause, considering whether or not to do that. Certainly, Japan is not out of the fight just yet. Of course, this is all kind of secondary to the major development of the game, which, as we suspected, turned out quite a bit in Germany's favor, as it took Moscow with more than 10 tanks left, several artillery, and in fact more than 20 artillery, and planes, infantry to boot, still some infantry left. So that was a good result. Germany now owns Russia and is poised to go big into Europe now, spending its entire build on a Nordic naval fleet and some associated land units to give the Allies something to think about. Of course, we revisited the victory condition rules, having remembered the victory city rule. I had thought that I won the game as soon as I occupied Moscow, but we've determined, after interpreting what are rather ambiguous rules in the rule book, so if you're listening, Wizards, that rule book could really stand to be refined. But we've come to a consensus that I have to hold 8 victory cities through to the beginning, I think it is, of Germany's next turn. Anyway, continuously, that's right. So I have to hold 8 cities now for the rest of this turn. We'll see if we can do it on the rest of turn 8. Well, it's been a nail biter here as we reach the end of turn 8. As we thought, it was all down to how long we can consistently hold on to victory cities. And I'm sad to report that we have to play another round. The Anzac and Americans, as you can see here, have kept with the script of needing to prevail on the Europe board. As Chris said, he can't really focus on winning the game, but rather on not losing, because the Axis are right there on the cusp on the Europe board. So naturally, we both have to throw everything we can there. So speaking of throwing everything you can at Europe, boy, that's a whole lot of naval units there on the brand new naval base in West India, ready to pounce on Egypt. So Egypt is the problem. Of course, they had a 90% chance, the UK did, of taking that, and they took it, and with the skin of their teeth. They're killing bombers there to preserve the one tank that managed to survive the onslaught into Cairo. The tanks from Iraq came back, took back easily, but doesn't matter, because as we reach the beginning of turn 9, Germany's going to check and say, well, we have 8 victory cities right now, but we haven't held them consistently on this turn. So unfortunately, we're going to have to slog it out for yet another turn. You'll be surprised to note that the Mediterranean is clear of Allied warships, which is amazing. There was quite a bit of naval combat here. You'll remember there were quite a few dudes there last time. So the Americans plunged everything into C-Zone 95. Italians scrambled, and Americans prevailed, but with only subs left over. The UK then took everything it had into Cairo with a transport and a cruiser, which then perished from a Italian bomber attack. Sent those subs up there, which caused Italy to build some destroyers in a plane, because if it can't get its IPCs, it can't do anything else. And then the remaining UK fleet, which you'll see up there, doubled back to Britain with all 4 of its planes in a last-ditch effort to stave off Sea Lion here on turn 9. It's the beginning of turn 9, and it's a new morning here on the gaming weekend, and with the benefit of a night's sleep in consideration, we've decided to call the game. Well, we actually fast-forwarded a little bit, and technically the game did end on its own terms. I'll explain that in a minute. So what happened here is we fast forwarded to what's going to happen in Europe. Obviously, the Allies need to interrupt the Axis from continuously holding 8 victory cities for an entire round of play. So, because the Italians lost and then retook Cairo, that clock resets. So that's a complete round of play, beginning with Italy's last turn. So we jumped forward to Italy's turn, and because the Germans had 4 tack bombers, or 3 tack bombers here in Ukraine that were planning to come down and reinforce Cairo, we just rolled forward to that invasion and determined that the Americans could not take back Cairo on their invasion, because as big as that fleet is, they're carrying 5 tanks, and those are the only land units that can make it there. I was actually expecting, when I first looked at it, that these planes could get there, but it turns out they don't have the movement points. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 into Cairo, so they're not going to be able to participate in that land invasion. So we rolled this invasion 3 times just for giggles, and each time the Americans failed to take back Cairo, which means it would go America's turn, UK's turn, and then Italy gets a chance. And so at the beginning of Italy's turn there, we would check the victory conditions. Axis would have held 8 cities for an entire round of play, and we win that way. Germany, of course, was planning on launching its Sea Lion, bringing these units down. They're not going to take London this turn because of everything that's been built there, but they're bringing 10 tanks and 10 guys into London every single turn. They'll whittle them down this turn, take it the next turn probably. They got bomber support. Here's the build that was coming. Another round of carrier and planes to beef things up. Some more land units. These, by the way, are handy dandy tackle boxes for Axis pieces. So that's how the game ends, not with a bang but a whimper. We have victory on the European map, of course, solely because this was a experiment here, a test of the kill Japan first strategy, in a particular iteration of that strategy, in reaction to the fact that this is now the 3rd time in a row where Axis has won due to Japan declaration of war on the first turn. We've seen what happens when that goes unchecked. We've tried this time to focus everything on Japan, so I'm going to let Chris talk about that primarily, since he did that with the Allies and he's already explained some of his reasoning. He can give you some more of his thoughts, but we're coming to a consensus here that the Japan 1 declaration of war is just more or less unbeatable with the out-of-the-box rules, which tends to make the game slightly broken. So we're probably next time around going to try some variation of a rule fix to compensate for that, whether that's a bid system or maybe trying young grasshoppers, alternate victory conditions. What we'd be interested in is hearing how you all deal with the J1 attack. We've already gotten some great comments in the YouTube comments. We would love to have some more. And if you do a bid system, where do you put your bids? We've had some discussion about that ourselves already this morning, and let Chris talk about that. If you use alternate victory conditions, such as young grasshoppers or someone else's, love to hear how that works out for you. But from the Axis perspective, obviously everything's a challenge. There were already a couple moves here that I made poorly, left some guys out of position or missed some attacks that I wish I would have taken. But everybody does that, and that notwithstanding, the Axis still won pretty handily. So all these guys here left in Europe, European mainland was never really a problem, and almost 20 tanks left sitting in Moscow, more than 20 artillery. That's a great position for the Axis to be in. So that's just tough to beat, and I'll let Chris share some thoughts on how he handled it.
All right, old cricket from the abandoned monitoring station in Dallas, Texas. So the game ended pretty much the way I thought the game was going to end at the beginning of the turn, which is with a loss on the Europe board. But this game was more a thought experiment on how to stop Japan from overwhelming the Allies on the Pacific board, which has been the script every time that we've played for the last several games since we've started tinkering with Japan 1. And I know a lot of people on the interwebs are kind of already there, which is why most people play with a bid system. So we're sort of rocking it like it's 2013 here at the Abandoning Monitoring Station. That being said, I wanted to see what would happen if we threw every available resource that we could at Japan, and sure enough, we neutered that. The Navy from the Med came around down into the Indian Ocean and took a leg off of their fleet there. Took another couple small, we'll call them maybe not whole legs, but feet on the islands with Anzac. And then the raid up north required Japan to put all of their resources there to lock that down. If he tried to pull those out, pull the cord, bad things I think would have ended up happening. So, listen, Japan was fully bottled up. They were going to lose. They were not going to be able to win the game. But the problem is the way the victory conditions are for the Axis, where you only need 6 victory cities on the Pacific board or 8 on the Europe board to win, is sort of the problem. As I had said, there comes a point in the game, both games, both on the Spanish beachhead game, on the last one that we played, where I needed to immediately respond to the 6 conditions over here, or in this game, once Japan was bottled up, I knew that Italy and Germany were going to get massively large. I was hoping to be able to get over there quicker than I did, but I started building over there as early as I reasonably could after Japan was contained, and ultimately it wasn't going to matter. Germany got too big too fast. Italy got too big too fast. And so I had to move all of these units out that I just locked down the Pacific board over, because those were the only units that could reasonably even try to make a go for Cairo to knock down that 8th city. So I was really playing not to lose for about the last 3 or 4 turns. I much would have rather have kept that fleet in the Pacific, keep that board locked down, and then start dedicating resources over in Europe the way I was, not necessarily projecting all the way through the Med and destroying that fleet, but using it to reinforce Europe proper. I think that would have been an interesting game had it played out. Certainly a much more balanced game. Even if they had 8 victory cities, the game could have gone on for quite some time towards defeat. So we're the conclusion is what I sort of said on the interlude that I had earlier. You can't pull everything out of the Med and not expect bad things to happen. So you're going to have to stay and fight on that board. If you stay and fight on that board, I don't know how you stop Japan on this board with the out-of-box rule. So we're going to do something different in all probability on game, what is that going to be? Game 11 will be the next one. So the current thinking is either a bid system, maybe young grasshoppers. We were talking about requiring the Axis to have 3 capitals the same way the Allied need to have 3 capitals, and then counting Anzac in India as half a capital. So in other words, you could take those 2 and that would be 1, but you still need 2 other of the major capitals in order to win. So in all probability, it's those 2, Moscow and London. I think you could do that without having to put extra pieces on the board. It balances the game a little bit, because if that was the game conditions here, Japan would have fought on. That would have fought on. I think I would have lost London eventually. It would have been a hell of a war in the Atlantic. Would have been entertaining. Those huge units over there in Moscow certainly would have come over here to bail Japan out, and they would have started scraping back. I think it would have been a much more entertaining game than, oh look, I just locked Japan down, now I'm going to run away and give them all back the Pacific board, and I've already lost in Cairo. So that sucks. But maybe the bid system's the right way. I like the idea of bidding it back and forth to see which side you get, because you sort of pick your own poison that way. If you want to bid higher or lower for the right to play the Axis, and then it gives you more options as the allies in terms of where to put those units. We had discussed a bonus battleship off the coast of Malay might discourage any raid there. That really gives you 2 more battleships down here, arguably more infantry in the Philippines to slow them down. There might be some utility there, more reinforcements in India to slow it down. Basically play Europe close to the same. If you have a little bit of extra resources, I could see tilting Africa in your favor, the Mediterranean in your favor just a little bit, but focusing obviously on this conflagration to make sure that what's happened the last several games doesn't continually happen. So stay tuned. The next game will be an entertaining one because it'll be a rule variant. If you've played with any of the rules or played with those, as Brian had mentioned, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Always like hearing people's thoughts. As Brian said, there's some moves here or there that you could have done a little bit better, a little bit worse. The dice could have been a little bit better, a little bit worse, anywhere they were. But I do think that the end result of this is a pretty close approximation of what's going to happen if we played this game 100 times, which is when I pull everything off the Europe board, I'm going to lose on the Europe map. So that's it. Hope everyone enjoyed the game. We are continuing our investigation of how to beat a Japan first declaration of war. And to answer something that young Grasshopper said, we will not soon be abandoning China in
Not
the
on
near
purpose,
future.
anyway.
Amen to that. See ya.